because I just saw the clock. Okay, there we go. We're live.
Awesome.
So you were saying you got a question about water intrusion just this morning?
Yeah, we got email today. It was actually one of Jeff's clients. He was working with travelers on something, so I jumped in to help. And
Okay.
they just kind of wanted to know, I guess they'd heard about the nuances in water coverages. So they wanted to just get a breakdown of what kind is covered, if, certain scenarios, what's covered, which is kind of right into what we're talking about today. So it's kind of perfect time.
Yeah. I know, it's perfect. Hopefully we have some good questions that come through today also. I'm hoping we get a lot of engagement because obviously with the hurricane that came through, flood coverage is it's even a different topic, but the water intrusion has been, I feel like, more and more prevalent over the last couple of years. I've heard more and more clients say, I've been in this home 20 years, never had an issue, and then boom.
Then that's all it takes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I was going to talk about today is there's flood zones are ranked, right, through A through X. And X is the lowest. That's what we're in right now. In Fredericksburg, 95% of Fredericksburg is flood zone X because we're elevated. We're not necessarily near a body of water. Maybe near the Rappahannock, you'll have a little bit of, different zones. But what happens is, so you're not required to have a flood policy, but 20% of floods occur in a flood zone X. So 1/5 of all floods occur in a zone that most people don't have flood insurance. That's scary.
That is scary. I know I had a client who was interested in a house in Furry Farms.
Okay.
Nowhere near water in our minds, geographically. And the listing said that it was in a flood zone, required flood insurance. I'm like, that cannot be right. So I get on the 100-year, map and I go in there and sure enough, this tiny little pocket of Fairy Farms of all places is in a flood zone. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know why or where or what has happening there, but so super interesting.
Yeah. And it's all rated by FEMA. So FEMA goes through and they rate each zone and it gets so nuanced. I've had policyholders who've come to us and their lane, like their backyard is flood zoned, but their house and the front yard is not.
Right.
Now that's up to a lender's discretion. They have to decide whether they want it or require it. We always would recommend it in that situation because look how close you are. You're on the brink. So why take a chance for $600, depending on, the factors, but most of the time for a flood zone X, you may be spending $300-$400 a year to make sure that you're good.
You're covered.
Yeah. So, water, and when water touches something, it's ruined. There is no coming back.
Oh, I know. I've been through a couple losses myself through basements and things. So, well, for those of you jumping on, we are so excited to have you. Please drop questions in the comments. We will make sure to address them. But I have Corbin with me today, and we're going to be talking about water intrusion. And if you've been watching for a minute, not just the flood variety, but like your everyday, we have a storm in Fredericksburg, and water's coming in a door, a window, up a sump pump, like any of the different ways. Water is so insidious, it finds a way. So Corbin, I want to kind of just, hand it over to you and really talk about, like we already discussed, some of the nuances about, I know that there is a lot of people out there who think, well, I have homeowners, I'm good. And as we know, that's not always the case.
That's a start.
So what should people be looking for and thinking about when they're thinking about coverage for their house?
Yeah. So homeowners insurance is definitely it's a great place to start for water coverage, but it is far from the end all be all. There's like you said, there's so many nuances to water coverages just on the way it gets in your house or on, the way it breaks, the pipe breaks or whatever, all that goes into your coverage. And obviously I can't, I just kind of need a disclaimer, every claim situation is going to be based on the facts of that claim. So, you can't take this for heart as in this will be 100% coverage. So every claim has its own factual scenario that needs to be addressed by the carriers. But there's 4 main areas or ways that water gets into your home. The first one is water seepage. So that's what that is let's say it happens a lot around, your water lines, your pipes, your toilets, your sinks, anywhere where there's a connection of a water pipe.
Okay.
What happens is over time, they kind of loosen, right? Those connections loosen a little bit, that plumber's tape and those PVC connections kind of start to just separate a little bit. And so what happens is slowly water will drip down and it'll, obviously cause damage over a long term. So this is actually not covered by your homeowner's insurance.
Okay.
So, and the reason being, insurance is there to help you in accidents or what they call occurrences, which are essentially surprises. Oh my God, I had no idea. A water seepage is considered a maintenance issue. That's you need to inspect your home. You need to make sure you're checking these areas. So one of the best practices is once a month, just do a quick cursory review of all your water pipes, any toilet, any bathroom, any sink. Just check underneath and see if there's a slow leak. If you see any water, or if you're underneath the bathroom, check your drywall above you from where the bathrooms are. Just see if you see any notice of a water spot or anything like that, because you want to get ahead of that. If you catch a simple water spot when it's just starting, that's an easy fix. That's maybe, you have a drywall guy come out, maybe cut out that little piece, put in a new piece, and that's a simple fix.
That's a handyman.
Yeah, a handyman comes in there, or yourself, you could probably fix that.
Yeah.
So that's obviously, an easier fix. And if you let that slowly go, and then mold forms, and then you've got larger issues on your hands, which are likely not going to be covered by your homeowners.
Okay.
With that said, some carriers, one of the main carriers that does this is Travelers. They do offer a water seepage coverage.
Okay.
It's rare. Like I said, most carriers do not, but I know the one that we work with, particularly Travelers, does have a great water seepage coverage. So that does provide you a sub-limit of coverage for any water seepage damage. Another way is a pipe bursting. So not the slow leaks, but I'm saying you've got an explosion and you've got not lack of better terms, a flood of water coming through into your home. That is an accident, and that is considered an occurrence. So those are covered on your homeowner's policy, typically up to your dwelling limit. So the coverage A on your policy, you typically have water burst coverage up to that limit. So essentially your home will be covered. If you have most of the time it's a freezing pipe that explodes. Right. That's the most common scenario.
So let me ask you about that for you a little bit of curveball. So obviously there's a handful or more than a handful of houses around here that still have the polybutylene piping.
Yep.
How do insurance carriers look at polybutylene, or do they look at it just like any other pipe?
It depends. So some carriers won't actually take it. Some carriers require updated plumbing. And that's the way it comes out. So certain carriers, it's all about their appetite. Some carriers, there's companies we have that's called all risk, right? And they essentially, all they do is broker out a deal to other insurance companies that will essentially handle any type of risk. Now they do have certain parameters for zip codes and areas that they'll go in, but they take on more, I guess, risky business, but their premiums are going to be higher because of that risk. But a lot of carriers want the PVC. They want updated piping. It's rare that you'll find one that'll just completely block you for that. But it is potential. It all depends on the carrier's appetite on how they'll rate it, but they will just rate it according to the plumbing. So if you've got the older plumbing systems in there that aren't really updated, then you're likely going to pay a higher premium to offset their risk for taking you on as a client.
That makes sense. And for those of you thinking about this too, how would anybody know? And the insurance carrier is not going to know, but I had a client who decided to purchase with polybutylene, and it did burst, which was unusual because the house was over 20 years old. Typically, if poly was going to burst by then, it would have.
Yep.
Well, year one in the house, and bingo, bango, like here we go. And so I think that's really important to be really upfront with your insurance agent about have the coverage.
Because what happens is another risk you're taking with that is if you don't let the carrier know, when you have that loss, the carrier's going to come out and look. They're going to come take pictures. They're going to see what kind of plumbing you have. And then there's a chance they'll disclaim your policy in its entirety because you were not honest and truthful on the application process. So because what they're doing is they're underwriting a risk according to certain guidelines. If they're underwriting it to a PVC pipe, but you really have the polyurethane, then what happens is they're like, oh, well, we didn't write you for that. Therefore, there is no coverage for this loss. So that's a huge risk to take. So just anybody out there that's doing that, just contact your company, let them know it may be higher premium, but you'll have coverage. So that alone is worth the peace of mind.
Yeah, that's huge. And if you guys if you're out there thinking, what's polybutylene piping and do I have it, send Corbin or I a message. We can help you determine that.
Yes, happy to do whatever we can to help with that. No problem. And so one thing with the pipe bursting, I used to have this rental house on Gordon Road. Every year, it never failed. So I've rented out. I tell my clients or my tenants, every year, if it gets below freezing, please just trickle the water out
Yes.
of the faucet. Just so it warms up your pipe so they don't, the water doesn't sit in there and freeze.
Yeah.
Because, so one of the recommendations I would say, and I went and did this to my pipes in that house, was I just insulated the piping that was on the exterior walls.
Okay.
So that's a big recommendation. If you have and most houses don't do this anymore. New constructions don't do this much anymore. Right. But if you have any plumbing lines that are run on the outside of your home, as in right on the edge of where, you're right outside on the other side of the wall,
okay, just
put some simple insulation. You can get it for really cheap at Lowe's. You just cut it. It's almost like a pool noodle. You just wrap it right around it. And it most of the time will do the trick to save you from the pipe burst issues.
Okay.
And so that's pretty much pipe burst. I mean, like I said, that's covered. That's on your typical homeowner's policy. You're going to have coverage for that. One thing that's definitely not covered on your homeowners is a flood. That's carte blanche. There is no homeowner's policy that has flood coverage. You will not have what they call an HO3, which is your typical homeowner's policy.
Okay.
Have that flood coverage because that is strictly provided under a flood policy.
Okay.
We could have a whole separate conversation about the nuances of flood itself because there's a private sector for flood, and then there's the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program run through FEMA.
Okay.
And there's so many different nuances to that, and this is probably not the place for it today.
Okay.
But we definitely want to sit down and talk about that one day because it depends. It just provides you different coverages, different limits. FEMA only covers up to 250. It's a different ball game that we should talk about.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so typically floods come from heavy rains, hurricanes, things like that. They will bring, inundate you with water. And the way a flood is defined is usually 1 acre or more, or 2 or more conjoined parcels inundated with water, meaning they're underwater. Okay. So that's
not for your inch in the basement. That is
much
more of an event.
Think about outside in. So if the water comes from the outside of your home in, typically, not all the time, but typically would be considered a flood if you've got those other parameters.
Okay.
And what happens is, so like we had talked about earlier, flood zones are ranked from A to X.
Yeah.
A being your most likely, like there is a high chance you're going to be flooding. X is your least likely. So all that will go into the pricing. So how much does a flood policy cost? Well, it depends on where you live.
Okay.
And depends on your terrain. It depends on your elevation. And there's certain things that you can get. And I won't go in detail on this either, but an elevation certificate. Okay. So an elevation certificate is something you can get from your county. Usually, you can go to the county courthouse. Usually, they'll have them on record. And if you get an elevation certificate, you can submit those to your insurance company, and that may give you a discount on your flood policy. Perfect. So because the elevation certificate says, I know you lump my area as an AE or A zone, but if I show this elevation certificate that our property is actually this high off of the water level, water table, then they'll likely cut your, you still have to have the policy because you're still in that zone, but it'll likely lower your rate significantly. But that is, like I said, case by case basis. Huge. Yeah, it's huge savings, but it is, case by case because you've kind of got to get the elevation certificate and then see if it does factor or change anything. And then one thing I know, A and AE require, your lender is going to require you to have a flood policy according to FEMA. It's not optional. Okay. And now if you get outside of that, it does become more optional, but your lender and their underwriting team could require it still. Depending on how close you are. Now, X is the least likely, but 1 in 5 floods occur in an X zone. So 20% chance that you're going to be in a flood, even though you're in the lowest rated flood zone. So that's incredible. It's scary. It's with everything that's been going on. And so I know even if you're not required it would be worthwhile having a conversation about it to see if it's worth adding to your insurance portfolio. Because if you're in an X, your premiums are going to be low. They're going to be super low because you're rated as being not likely to have a flood, but the protection and the peace of mind for that one day, if anything ever happened, it would be worth every penny. Because then if you're huge. You could essentially be without a house and no recourse. That's scary. Right. And I just, we don't want our clients or people being in that situation. So if you ever have issues with flood, you want to just talk about flood, just call us. I mean, we'd be happy to sit
Okay.
down and talk about it.
Okay.
And then the last,
Go ahead.
oh no, so go ahead. If you had a question, go ahead. I was going to transition.
No, I
over.
was going to say, yeah, no, I think that's incredibly important to consider, especially, of course, on our minds as the devastation over the weekend from the
Yep.
hurricane in many different areas. And so I think it's important for, if you have any questions on flood insurance, to get with Corbin right away,
Yep.
sooner than later, because you definitely don't want to be in a position where you shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yep.
And now, unfortunately, these things are happening with frequency. So I think that's awesome. But no, you were going to go ahead and transition, Corbin.
The last one, there's the last main way that water comes into your home is through your pipes, right? And not necessarily a pipe burst above you or in your home, but from the pipes from either the county or your septic system, or from the failed sump pump.
Yeah,
and
sump
this
pump
is
a big one.
Yeah, sump pump failure. So we always, at the capital agency, we always add water backup coverage. Unless we're specifically requested to remove it, we have it on there. Because for the value of what you get, which is you're probably paying $60, $70 a year, and you're going to get $10,000, $20,000 in water backup coverage. And what that is, so let's say you have, or the county has a failure, or the septic system has a failure, and water backs up from your toilets into your home. There's no coverage for that under your homeowner's policy, typically.
Okay.
You have to add an endorsement, which is the water backup / sump pump failure endorsement. And that covers, like if you have a sump pump failure in your bathroom, we've got a leak and the sump pump doesn't act to kind of clean up the water leak, or if you have, like I said, a water backup issue from the plumbing outside of your home into your home, this water backup coverage goes towards that. This gives you a sublimit of money that will go towards repairing any damages caused by that water backup. If you have a finished basement, you better have this coverage. Like, not even negotiable. It should be a requirement, to be honest with you.
It should.
Because, and not just a small sublimit. You need 20, 30, we have up to $50,000 that we can put on a water backup, because everything into, all these materials, all these things are going to have to be replaced, and you're not going to get that done for $5,000 or $10,000 on a finished basement.
You are not, especially these days, post-pandemic, where it's still hard to get materials, find good labor, et cetera. So those costs to rebuild things like that have skyrocketed still.
And that goes towards why, we need to make sure you have this coverage. And I'm begging people, if you have a finished basement, just call me and let's talk about it. Let's just go through your policy. Not even necessarily that you need to book with me, but I just want to make sure that people have the right coverages. Because there's nothing more heartbreaking than seeing somebody who's going through the worst experience of their life at that moment, and then they still don't have any support from their insurance company.
Oh, absolutely. What is the appropriate, and I think this falls into this category. I feel like over the last couple of years, when we've had such tremendous rainfall, that people, it's not even necessarily backing up through the sump pump or through an ejector pump. It's more coming from around a basement door or a window. So it's an exterior intrusion, but I know there are kind of some nuances on, it's not coming up through a sump pump. So the sump pump didn't fail. It is an actual intrusion, but that's not considered a flood either. So I know there's this middle ground. So what is the recommended coverage for things like that?
So there is not necessarily, I don't know of any coverage that you can buy for that I've come across yet. No.
Okay.
But, and actually I just talked to my business partner about this yesterday. He was a director of travelers over property, the whole property claims unit. So he did this all the time. Technically, standing water and steam, just for the, just to throw it in there, are not covered.
Okay.
Now, with the right insurance agent, we may be able to argue some things.
Right.
And because honestly, me and Jeff, we did claims our entire careers. I was on the legal side handling, I litigated insurance. Jeff has run insurance claims teams for his entire career. We did this every day. So that's gray enough where we can make arguments. So technically it's not supposed to be covered under the policy, just carte blanche, but because technically your doors aren't supposed to fail. That's technically a door failure or a water failure or a maintenance issue. And I'll kind of throw this in there because I just found out about this the other day. I had Greg, the warranty manager for Atlantic, come through. we went back and my windows on the basement side, which are
Mhm.
close to the ground when I'm cutting grass, had started to build up a little algae in there. What it
Okay.
did is it actually plugged these vents in the bottom of my window. So
Mhm.
water was starting to stack in there. And when I pulled out the algae, water just flooded out. That could have
Okay.
caused water. Yeah. So definitely check that. And I can
That's
come check
good
yours
to
too, but
know.
make sure if you have any lower level windows, especially basement windows where you have a walk out basement, check there's newer houses, especially have these little vents on the bottom of your windows, and make sure that those are clear of debris. Because once those clog, the water doesn't have a way to escape. All it does is fill up, and it'll backflow into your house. So
Okay.
that's the reason it's not necessarily covered, because technically if you did maintenance, which I should have done, and now I haven't,
Right.
it wouldn't occur. Um,
I think we're
so
also guilty of those little things that you don't think about, like something so basic
yeah,
as checking those little, I call them the jailbreak windows, but like the little windows,
yeah,
just you kind of, it's so easy to forget about that in your
oh, yeah.
day-to-day maintenance.
And that's the easiest place for the debris to stack up, because when it goes in there, you don't see it, but you're cutting grass will just float in there. And
Yeah.
then the algae with the warmth and the kind of, if you have any kind of grassy substance in the warmth, it could easily form that algae on there.
Well, I think that's a great reminder to just quickly throw out there to homeowners to right now is a great time to be checking. Like Corbin mentioned earlier, just like doing your checks in the house, but do them outside too. Like look at if you have a walk up basement with a stairwell, make
Yeah.
sure that drain at the bottom is not, same thing. Grass can stack up, mulch that travels, all kinds of things can get in there. We're coming up on gutter cleaning season.
Yeah.
I've had clients who didn't clean their gutters. Well, that water has to go somewhere.
Yep.
So it's coming down. Same thing with drains, making sure the drains, the bottom, your downspouts are routed away from your home.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
so easy for that water to get in the house. And then like we've just heard is, potentially not covered. If you could have prevented it.
You definitely, and that may be a key delineation in insurance.
Mm.
Is could you have prevented it, right? A pipe burst, action like that? No. But maintenance issues that lead to water intrusion, yes. And that is typically the line for when insurance covers or not. If it's an accident or an occurrence, yes. But if it's something that maintenance could have prevented, likely not. Now, there's sometimes coverages you can buy on top of your policy through endorsements, as we talked about earlier, but not all the time. And definitely not groundwater. I haven't seen that. Some carriers may offer that. I have not seen it through our carriers, and I don't think it's very common. But one thing to also make sure you do is winterize your home.
Yep.
When it becomes, or when you start having below freezing nights, all those hose bibs on the outside of your home, make sure you open them up, let the water drain out. Well, first, turn off the water, as in shut those valves to those hose bibs.
Yep.
Open them up a little bit. Let any water that's in that pipeline run out. And then that will not prevent 100%, but likely prevent you from having a pipe burst behind your wall due to the water freezing in that line.
Yeah, so that's huge. Like I've seen a lot of issues. I've experienced this, and then through clients, experienced on things like condensation pumps.
Yep.
A breaker trips, the condensation pump is no longer pumping, and you'd be shocked. Sometimes those are pumping out gallons of water an hour. These little machines, things like that are really important to look at. A sump pump, obviously, you can get battery backups. A lot of alarm systems now have water sensors you can put by your hot water heater, anywhere that by your sump pump, ejector pump.
And you get discounts for that on your policy. So if you do have those things, make sure you let your insurance agent know, because those get discounts. If you have any kind of water sensors in your basement, if you have any kind of alarm system, really, if you have any kind of alarm system, burglar alarm, water alarm, any CO2 alarm, all those go towards a discount.
Okay, that's really good to know.
Yep.
And for those of you out there thinking, well, I don't have an alarm system or whatever, you can get really rinky-dink little sensors that go right into the pan under your hot water heater that you hopefully have. And they just emit a super loud noise like right inside the home. So that's huge to acknowledge too, that you don't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be hooked to an app and all this. It can be just an obnoxious alarm right in your house too. You can have them by windows. I mean, there's lots of if you have a concern or feel like it's, I can't tell you in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, how many clients I've said, I've been in this house 10, 15 years, never had an issue. And then boom.
Yeah.
And that's what you're trying to prevent for.
Yes.
That's why you have insurance, because a basement that gets toast. I don't think people understand, even an inch drywall is like a sponge. So the minute that drywall is touched even a little bit, you're cutting out at least 2 feet of drywall. You're putting new drywall in, and then mudding and painting and trim and probably flooring. I mean, it adds up really, really quickly.
Maybe insulation. And if it touches electric, I mean, you could be looking at the simplest thing with water could cause massive issues. And that's why it's so important to know the intricacies of water coverages. It is so important to talk to a broker about your insurance. It's easy to go online and get a policy. I'm not going to lie to you. That's the easiest thing in the world to do, and it's convenient, but you're not likely getting the coverages you need. And that's something that we pride ourselves on, is making sure our clients have, or at least understand, because I can't, if a client doesn't want the coverage, I just need to make sure that they understand. And that way they can make the best educated decision for themselves. If you don't think the cost is worth it, that's fine. But I at least want to make sure that I've explained it thoroughly to you.
And I think that's huge because, especially when we're talking about home buyers, we're still in the buying process, and there's a lot going on. We get under contract, we're doing home inspections, and then their lender is like, hey, I just need you to get me a quote. Any quote, doesn't matter, just get me a quote, is usually like the talk track. And so you're right, people go like insurance quotes online or Geico or like some name that they're familiar with. It's, big box store type, one size fits all, and get a quote. And then sometimes in their mind, they're like, well, I'll go back and look at that later. But then we're packing and moving, and there's so many things that happen, and then it's like years down the road, and we have no idea what insurance we even have or the coverage, because there was just this rush to get a quote, any quote.
That is common, all too common.
Yeah, I see that a lot, and so I think it's so important, like you just said, to just have the conversation, be reviewing every 6 months or annually or whatnot, and we covered this a couple weeks ago, but just as a quick reminder out there for those of you watching too, that now is a great time to talk to Corbin, not only about the water intrusion coverage, which is critical as we go into fall, but also to just be making sure your dwelling limits and things of that have been adjusted. So make sure you're checking in with that also. Now, Corbin, let me ask you this. If somebody's already with Goosehead or maybe from another provider, how hard is it to switch if they were to call you and talk to you about their needs?
We make this as easy as possible. So we do every bit of legwork for you that we can. We will talk to your mortgage company for you. So essentially the process is, if you just give us a call, and it doesn't have, there's almost like a fear out there that you have to wait for your renewals to come up. You have to wait until your policy's up. That is completely false. What happens is you call us, we start the process, we go through, we gather some information from you, and we get to know you a little bit, because in order to be properly insured, I need to know you. I need to know what, your family, what's going on in your house. What do you do? Because I need to make sure I have the coverages for you. And then, so we'll get that information, kind of get to know you. And then we'll present the quotes. And then if we bind, we will actually notify your mortgage company for you. You don't have to worry about that headache.
Awesome.
We will update your policies, get everything done that way. The only thing that the client is responsible for is notifying their old carriers that they have to cancel. And once you join us, or if you are, if we're lucky enough to have you as a client, from there, what happens is I can reshop your insurance between my 50 plus carriers every year, every other year, and make sure that you still are having the most competitive rates with the best coverage possible. So then it becomes a lot easier. You don't even have to contact anybody, because as your agent now, I can handle your cancellations because I was your agent on this policy. So then I can do everything for you. We'd love to have, love to talk to anybody who needs or has questions about insurance. Well, I'm not a pushy. I'm not going to bombard you. We can just sit down and have a conversation and then see if we're a fit.
Awesome. That's huge. And I just threw up Corbin's contact information. You can see it in a little ticker below here. So phone number there is mobile. There's an email. So call, text, email. Make sure you're reaching out and getting the information. And if you have questions, if you're seeing this and we're not live anymore, please still drop your questions in the comments. One or both of us will make sure we're responding and getting you that information. But don't hesitate to call us and reach out too through social or any of the information below. So
no, we appreciate it. We're here to help. I appreciate you inviting me here, Jessica.
Yeah, no, the information is so important. And I mean, I've been, myself, I've dealt with personally water intrusion issues, and it is not fun. I mean, it is just really a process. I know people think, oh, that sucks, but it just really is between getting a water, damaged person in there who specializes in getting you dried out, and the rebuild and the timelines. I mean, it can be months to do just small rooms. You have a 2,000 square foot basement that's finished. That can be, just significant time, money, and you want to make sure you're covered. A lot of people, like I know, at the time my coverage was like, yeah, you have some pump coverage. And I was like, okay, great. You don't even ask like, well, what is the limit? Like how much am I covered for?
Exactly. Because that's a sub-limit.
Yeah.
Dwelling coverage doesn't cover that. Yeah. You only get that sub-limit towards those damages. So it's very important.
Yeah. And so it's important to have the appropriate riders and things in place, because sometimes those limits are like, max 10,000.
Yep.
That might get you some floor.
Yeah. That'll get you started, but that's not going to finish the job.
That might be like materials only. So I think this is so important. So I really appreciate your time joining us, educating everybody, and we know how to find you if we need some.
Anybody needs me, I'm here. I really appreciate your time today. It was great.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks, Corbin. We'll see you next month too, and we'll dive into maybe some more of the flood stuff.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.